Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Benos podcast. And today's guest is Coach Will Weaver. He's been a coach on various levels, coaching NCAA basketball at Texas, at Sam Houston State, also at the GLeague level, at the international level for the Sydney Kings, where he was a head coach, assistant coach with the Australian national team, NBA assistant coach. There's a vast variety of roles that he had throughout his career. And today we talked about a whole bunch of different subjects. Obviously, we talked about communication with players as a head coach, as an assistant coach. We talked about his coaching role as a head coach in Sydney and which situations he encountered the most. Obviously, we touched a little bit on his background, but what I found most interesting is his rules that he sets for his work-life balance and coordinating that with his wife and the path that they chose to support each other. So he gave me some relationship advice in that aspect, but it was fun and games and lots of good information, very good substance, very good content for everybody to enjoy. Please subscribe to this podcast. If you really enjoy, please support our cause and become a Patreon. Also share this podcast, comment, like it on all social media. I'd appreciate it. And we'll continue to grow. Lots of big guests coming up. And I mentioned on this podcast that Coach Lemanis is coming here on as well. So if you have certain questions, don't feel free to contact me and ask questions. Meanwhile, enjoy this episode with Will Weaver. And we're rolling. Will, what's up? Welcome to my little metaverse here.
I'm so happy to be here in the flesh. I've enjoyed it, listening to it many times. And let me just say, as we sit here on Friday, the day after the finals, congratulations on the season that you and your organization put together. Remarkable.
Yeah, thank you. It's still hard to process sometimes, but it's like if you reflect upon everything that happened and transpired throughout the season, it's like there's a sense of appreciation, obviously. But like I told you before we went on, there's so many runner-ups that I had to experience in my lifetime that it kind of irks me, like you're starting to smile at it a little bit, like, man, like when is this championship gonna come, like for me personally, but also for the team as well. So because we've been to plenty of conference championships since I've been here, and it's been a really this season has been special just because of the extra run and how everything transpires. So there's more appreciation than hurt, I think.
Well, I'm lucky to know several people in that organization, and each one of you, of course, has been on your own strange, winding path to end up in that place. And that's, of course, the thing I think that can get lost. The Celtics were defeated by the Warriors in 6 games, right? It's like these sort of big, abstract organizations competing against each other when, while that's true, of course, each human, right? Like Marcus Smart, I watched him at Flower Mound High School in Texas, practice, 40 times. I was recruiting their 6th man on their high school team for the college that I worked for at the time. And so I remember him being the winner of all winners in Texas high school basketball, multiple state championships, obviously goes on to Oklahoma State, things that were big deals, huge news cycle items of him getting into it with the fan during a game, and like these kind of things that just totally disappear from anyone's aware. No one is thinking about that, and nor should they be. But I also appreciate now, having coached for long enough, that all those things are the good stuff. So I'm certain that all of you will take the harness good, block bad from this experience, and it is worthy of congratulations. So congrats again.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. All those things are building blocks to your career, right? Whether it's coaches or players or everything, it just ends up being a part of you, and that's what builds also ultimate competitors. Yeah, like you persevere, you overcome, and then you get better, you get harder, you just kind of just grind it out over time, and then as we did this year, we grinded out all the way to the finals, and just at the end just kind of ran out of juice, it seems like, right? So it's I think it's very telling also what's ahead, because we got a good foundation. So we should be keep going upwards from here on up.
Well, you work in a big brick mansion, and of all the mansions on the NBA metaphorical block, just to think about how many people have carried some of those bricks and the degree to which all of you, Brad's obviously like going from mortaring the bricks to trying to mix the stuff into things that becomes bricks, that I think is emblematic of a lot of the unselfishness that exists in the Celtics. And I certainly am a fan of it from afar. So enough about that. We couldn't breeze over the fact that it's quite an accomplishment.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. So we're moving on, but we also this is long overdue because we've been. I like to call my basketball compadres friends, because this is it's a really a big family. So and we go way back because our national team experiences and battles with Australia, where you were a part of, go back all the way when we first, I think, encounter was 2014. So what's the thing that you remember the most before we get into it? Because I prepare for you 4 quarters, as for all the coaches as I do. We're going to talk about background, coaching, communication, and then some personal things that we're going to go through. But from our battles with the national team, what do you remember the most? Is there one thing that stands out from battling Lithuania?
Yes. The truth is, it feels like 90% of our games were against you. And of course, we probably played 8 times over the course of 6 or 7 years, but the amount of days that we resided in the same hotels in
friendlies
China,
included,
South America, obviously, Europe, all over the place. The Lithuanians were our sort of sister country, and or maybe brother country is a better analogy, because we just fought like hell. But the thing that stands out that cracks me up to no end was, as the Australian team, we certainly had a identity that we cherished and nurtured about being tough and rugged, and we even had a made up word for it, amorphic, where anything that came our way, we would understand that's a part of tournament play, and that's a part of the unexpected is what separates the great teams from the good teams, and that you couldn't control everything. And so
amorphic, how did you call it? Amorphic?
Yeah, being amorphous was how we called it, which I don't believe this is a word, at least not in the way that we were using it. But we were playing in Argentina in the warm-up for the Rio Olympics, and we were set to play you guys one night and play Argentina the next night. And during the warm-ups, our guys noticed that there was water pooling on both ends of the court, I think, coming out of the ceiling. It was raining outside. And our guys threw a fit. They're like, this is ridiculous. They can't put us in danger. We can't. And as we're in the stands, as they're trying to deal with this issue, and several of our NBA players, who, of course, you make it to the NBA, you're used to the best of the best. There's a level of spoiled that we all get, right? Those that get to be on NBA teams. As I'm in the stands listening to one of our NBA players complain about this, I look down and see the entire Lithuanian team playing one-on-one with no dribble limit, literally 5th graders in the park, just backing just Jonas fucking smashing into Domas, just fucking boom, putting his shoulder in his chest. And in between every point, some poor son of a bitch is out there with a towel trying to control the water. And I'm like, at no point will I ever claim that our group is tougher than their group, because I'm watching these guys, for the absolute love of it, just destroy each other on literally an ocean of water underneath their feet. It's one of the most remarkable images I have in my entire basketball career.
So that goes to your word, morphing. We're morphed, and we use that situation to this is a part of the whole thing, and just morphed it into our whole preparation. But it didn't last long. I remember that we were doing it with our assistant coaches, looking at each other like, oh my God, we have it's 10 days or 2 weeks, I think, outside of the Olympics, maybe 10 days, something like that.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my God, like this is gonna be like, let's see how long Jonas Kozlauskas is gonna have like us doing this. Like we're looking at each other like let's call it a quits. It's enough. Like we showed the players went through a warm-up, then through a practice, like all together, it's like an hour. That's fine. So we got lucky, we got away there, but there was a high expectation of keeping the players in shape and doing it. But that's what also, not necessarily that practice, but this whole trip to Argentina at the end pushed us past our peak at the end. Like we peaked too early in Rio. And that was one thing I think in hindsight, also coach was saying that trip to Argentina was probably not necessary. We should have went to Sao Paulo, which we went after Argentina, played a friendly tournament there. And it was Brazil, and it was you guys as well, I think. So that's where we played, because we couldn't play in Argentina. We played there. So, Brazil and maybe somebody else, I don't remember. So, and that was the tournament that we should have done instead of Argentina, Sao Paulo, then Rio. And we were already exhausted because we were on the road before that. We were in Spain playing friendly game in Spain against Spain already. So it was a very tough preparation. We peaked against Argentina in Rio, where we won in overtime. And then it just kind of slowed down slowly, unfortunately. And you guys, that was my memory that I remember, because we played so many friendly games. We played well against you in the World Cup in 2014 in the group stage. But the one that hurt the most, and that, like, I remember we played in China. That was a hurtful one. But the one that I remember was the one in Rio, because we were going down. We met in the quarterfinals, and there was do or die. And that's when I told also everybody, because I've been watching you guys since Coach Lemanis got there, and we played the friendlies. You guys came to Europe sometimes to play, and you were peaking at 2016. I felt like, I mean, you guys then still continue with the same core to play also in China, and it was also the same brand of basketball. But in 2016, it felt like you guys deserved the medal. It was popping. Everything was popping, like the way you guys were reading each other. And it was just so hard to scout. And spoiler alert for the ones listening, Coach Lemanis will be on here sooner or later as well. We're going to talk about that preparation of building up towards that system, because it was a very special way to scout and prepare for you, because there was counters for everything. Do you remember anything from the lessons you learned from Coach Lemanis from those summers that if you could point out one lesson, about maybe building a system or something that you felt like just is very like, did you carry on till this day? I have a German word for it, but not the English word.
Don't brag. Absolutely. I think he was exceptional. At that point, he had been with the national program for a number of years, worked for Brett Brown, was obviously an incredibly experienced coach in his own right in clubs in Australia, New Zealand. So I thought he managed the coordination of those kinds of things quite well. And the way he did it was so collaborative. And, some people act like, I don't have an ego. Like, he truly does not have an ego. Like, there's no part of him that thinks that it's about him in the least. That was reflected in him stepping away to let Brett come in. He thought the team needed a new voice after the World Cup in China. But every decision along the road, including the millions that you have to have as a head coach, and planning these campaigns and thinking about the tours, and who are we going to invite to the training camps, and are we going to have it be a competition at the training camp, or are we just going to pick the roster before the training camp because of all these time constraints? He handled them all in a composed, analytical, but also very communicative way. And he was constantly engaging with Aaron Baines and Dellavedova and Bogut and Patty Mills and Joe Ingles. And I mean, really every single guy on the roster had a voice that was a part of the culture that he grew. We didn't have team captains, as an example, in his time, because of how strongly he felt that it wasn't one person's job to lead and be the vocal leader. It was everyone's job to see what was needed and be ready to step into any gap. So I think that, yes, seems disconnected from the basketball, and yet it permeated, of course, the basketball that we played as well.
Yeah, like it's egoless basketball. You could truly tell that really reflected his character on the court. That's a really good point. Now, if I think back, that just the ball movement, the sharing, the reading, and it was very. I didn't know you guys didn't have a captain, but it all makes sense that everybody could contribute and put their 2 cents. But sometimes there's also like a level of there's maybe you have to have also self-awareness as a player to not talk too much, because some guys say, oh, you let me talk, then I'm gonna just keep on riffing, and there's a line that I think that also self-awareness as well as like common leadership.
If there's one thing Aussies will do, they'll tell you to shut the fuck up. They're quite happy. That is a gift that Australia is quite happy to speak their mind and
straightforward
going on, and like, okay, just throw it to fucking Patty and let him shoot it again. Like, what are you doing? That was the awareness maybe you were talking about.
Yes. So awareness and balls. So that's but so let's go into your background, because that's the first quarter I wanted to start with, and I asked that to everyone because I feel like basketball is a somebody. It's not a. I think it has a life of its own, and I'm wondering, when did basketball find you? Like, where was the situation where you first encountered basketball and felt like this is for me?
I didn't realize that it was for me yet, but my parents are divorced, and on Wednesdays and every other weekend I would be with my dad, and it was during the Bulls run that I was a kid watching. The channel was called WGN, and it was the Chicago local channel that was broadcast on cable television throughout America. And many nights I can remember him saying, let's watch the Bulls game, because he loved playing basketball. He played even into his 30s and 40s pickup games around Austin, Texas, where I was from. And I think anybody that watched those teams, heard the intro song, like that still gives me goosebumps to this day when you play in Chicago. And so I can remember watching the games. I can remember at breakfast the next day reading the newspaper and trying to understand what was being written about them. And I could tell that it was such a complex and beautiful, endlessly unsolvable kind of puzzle, with real stakes and real pathos. And I hadn't played basketball at that point. I didn't start playing basketball until almost, I think really as a high school freshman. And so I didn't have I was just able to sort of observe it in its own way without putting myself into it yet. And as I wasn't a very good player, obviously, because I hadn't played since I was in high school, but the teams that I was a part of at the school that I went to, it was one of the better sports in our school. And so I got to play a tiny role on that team all 4 years, that gave me an appreciation for and perhaps a perspective of how much work there is to be done for a basketball team to be successful. And I had no aspirations for coaching. I didn't know that was in my future yet, but being a part of that team was deeply meaningful. And I think once I started to reflect and try to plan what my career might be or my interest might be and what I wanted to study, it was pretty obvious pretty quickly in that process that being parts of teams was where I felt the most myself.
Mm-hmm. And just, like being parts of teams, that's something that I grew up with that from childhood, because it was natural progression. Both of my parents were athletes, team handball, and my father was basketball. So sports was around, but then like the sense of team, the sense of having a tribe and being in a tribe and having like a purpose within the tribe is something that like I think we all feel more valuable and feel like this is like you're doing something productive. You're feeling that you're useful, and then it gives you some sort of purpose every day that you're building towards something. And at the end of the day, that's what makes you happy, I think. So and everybody finds a different, maybe a tribe, it doesn't have to be a team. It doesn't have to be a sport, but it's always some sort of team of 3-4 people, or in work. And I think discovering that, especially sports, we talked about it the other day here, sports is such a beautiful thing with just so many people, and everybody is just coming there for the same cause. And especially the Celtics fans, it's just something special to experience in the playoffs. Like I had the pleasure for the first time to experience the playoffs, and then in the finals, and you have a good contrast of regular season, which is already a one. I mean, I don't mean to defer now to the Celtics again, but it was like just the experience itself was immersing. I immersed myself in that. But you, just to go back on your coaching, once you start to discover that coaching was your path, and you wanted to be on teams, you had NCAA, you had GLeague experience, national team, Australian club, and Sydney as a head coach, NBA, several different roles for several different teams. How would you, on each of that level, if you go through each of them, how would you define? Because coaching is different on each level. There's a different aspect to each level that maybe plays the main role. So like if you go through each progression, if you go through all those leagues that I mentioned, what each one of them, what's special about coaching on each one of them? How would you say to differentiate?
You're very right, of course, that each one, the context of each one is so different that it at times almost feels like a different sport, right? And yet, from the coach's perspective, to me at least, it is a simple answer always. There is a problem to solve, and you can break it down into many small components, but it's how can we succeed as a group, right? Like how can we accomplish what we were setting out to accomplish? And so in order to do that, the first thing is to figure out, well, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And then from there, well, who do we want to be a part of this, right? Who do we want to select? Whether we're picking teams for the Australian Boomers or the G League or an NBA team or a club team, like if you know where you're trying to get, then you're trying to select people to help you do that. And it might change over time. You might be trying to achieve different things or a range of things, but without that sort of North Star, I think it's very difficult to make all the many faceted, truly millions of decisions that you make over the course of any given season without the ability to look towards something and say, we are using every decision as a little paddle in the water to get us to our destination. And that has been a big key in any kind of success I've had, is engaging with the owner of a team, the people who are running the team, the head coach, to try to help them give me an answer of what are we trying to do and what is the rubric for our success? Because then I can work to try to make sure that I'm not wasting time accomplishing something that seems worthy to me, or seems one of our players is working on something that you don't actually care about. That I think is largely your role as the head coach, especially. Understand the vision, emphasize the vision, spread the vision widely, create systems and people, resources in order to help accomplish that, and then sort of praise it as, this is where we're going, here's where we are. This is where we're going, here's where we are. This is where we're going, here's where we are. Routine over and over and over again. That is, I think, writ small, the job of a coach in NCAA, in the G League, in the NBL, in the NBA, no matter where you are.
So it's basically like that's the common denominator. You have to set like the goal, the North Star for each team you're on, and each season could be different on the same team as well. Like, as you can be rebuilding or you can be building at a championship level. But do you think, let's give an example. If you're a head coach, you were a head coach with the Sydney Kings, is it, just as an example, it could be somewhere else as well, but from a head coaching experience, do you think it's feasible to develop young players and be playing for a championship? Is that something
Yes.
Okay.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
But Sydney's actually a great example. And because I know and love the owner so much, and I'm very confident in talking openly about the process that led me to get there. And it hinged on this exact idea. I said, look, it seems like you're trying to accomplish something very difficult. You're trying to restore one of the great teams in the NBL to a long-term period of dominance. Like that seems to be what I'm hearing you say, but can you please break it down for me? Let's say we agree to work together. Between that day and the start of training camp, what are the things that you're going to be looking for? Like, what are the things that you're going to, there, if we accomplish them, you're going to say, this is a smashing success. And then in that first season, and then over the course of our first agreement with each other, our first contract, like what are the behaviors? What are the key performance indicators? You know, whatever sort of jargon you choose to select. And I thought maybe he, you know, I was just getting to know him, right? We'd had a few phone calls. I thought he might equivocate. He might say, well, you know, I want to win. I just want to win big. But he was very capable of, he sent me a list. He said, I want to fill the pipeline of talent for players and staff. I want to replenish it. I want super talented individuals with his players and staff as part of the Sydney Kings. I want us to be the most prepared team in the league, and I want it to show to other people how much more prepared we are than our opponents. I want the fans that come to our games to feel the degree to which we care about giving ourselves to them, that they really are the center of what we're trying to do. That list I printed out and gave to my assistant coaches. I had a copy of it in my office. I referenced it in future jobs and conversations with people, because I think it was very clear that he had a vision for where that program was going to go. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they won the NBL championship this season, just 3 years after he sent that email to me. You know, I carried a few bricks as a part of that, but the vision was his, and the execution of it stemmed from his ability to communicate all the specific things that he knew needed to happen for them to get where they just got.
You think that's sustainable? Like, how is that sustainable over a longer period of time? Like, I mean, in NBA, there's dynasties, obviously, but there's also is like in international play, in club play, you think it's sustainable because the guys, I mean, you have to do an excellent job of scouting, recruiting, and bringing up the next guys because they get bought out or they go to a higher level, and you basically are to a certain extent always rebuilding. You know, always like 2 new players, 3 new players. You're very rarely you bring back the whole team, and it's not comparable to national team because you got contracts, you got changes, and then you also bringing in new young guys to develop. So it's always a new challenge each year. And I'm thinking, how is it feasible in the long term to build a club that's going to be always successful, always playing for the top?
Yeah, I mean, self-awareness, as you spoke to earlier, is not just a key in sport, right? Like it's like one of the underlying traits that allows many people to be successful or causes them to fail. So I think the first step in after you sort of received the North Stars, right, where we're headed, the things that we care about, and tried to tier them, right, tried to rank them in a way that says, all right, yeah, we've got 12 priorities, but they aren't all equal, right? The thing we might care most about is assembling talent, right? That doesn't mean we also don't care about who they are as human beings, or the way that they're going to represent us in front of the fans, or all the other kinds of things that you might list. Your example earlier about competing while developing, I think there is tension there, right? Like there's a finite number of game minutes, and so how you allocate those minutes reflects your priorities largely. Yeah. If you're playing 7 guys and you know, each of them are playing 75+% of the minutes available in those games, and that's going to mean there's just an opportunity cost that the younger players aren't going to get as many of those minutes. And so that doesn't mean that you can't develop the players, but it does mean that it's a different context for that development, and you need some strategies to try to mitigate the degree to which that rotation plan is going to cut off one of the more typical ways that a player grows. So that was one of the slides that I sent him in the presentation after one of our earliest conversations was, here's the tension of these priorities. Here are the ways that I think we can try to mitigate them, but we should not hide from the fact that some of these priorities are going to be in conflict with each other at times. And so that to me shines a light on how important it is to go through the exercise of listing, ranking, communicating routinely about those priorities so that you can identify those conflicts and say, okay, like, is that still the star we want to head to? Do we need to change our heading? Do we need to slow down? Do we need to speed up? Do we need to sacrifice one of these priorities for 3 other ones that we care a lot about? That is why I say what I say about what a coach is. A coach's job is to be a problem solver. And in order to solve those problems, you got to identify them and be willing to talk about what the problem truly is.
And be precise about it. Like it goes back to communication, being precise about addressing it. And also, I think the key to managing all this, to managing expectations from the management and from the fans and from the staff, from the players, from the agents that are representing the players, there's a whole bunch of dynamics that go into play. And it all boils down again to communication, especially if you have to communicate a team goals to the outside. You can't have unrealistic expectations and then hype up for the fans to have a lot of hope or create this kind of bubble that you are just trying to kind of portray one's false confidence, maybe, where you were not truly honest to yourself, to your club, that your club is not ready to compete at that level, but you're trying to paint this picture that you are. And at the end, you're basically heading for disaster, heading for a crash course. So I think that external communication is probably, if not the biggest factor, is at least an X factor in the whole scheme of things. Would you agree with that?
No doubt. And the great Charlie Munger says, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you set up a system in which people's incentives are misaligned, you are not going to get the same efficiency that you will if their incentives are aligned. And mm-hmm. So when I worked with an NBA player, very early in our relationship with each other, I would try to explain how I saw our incentives being aligned. I would like for you to be very, very rich, and I'm here to help accomplish that, right? Like, assuming that was one of the goals that the player had. Tell me what drives you. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Truly, no, don't give me the BS press conference answer. Like, are you doing this for your mom? Are you doing this for your child and your wife or your brother or yourself to prove people wrong? Like, why are you doing this? I'll tell you my answers, right? And once we've got that, like, great. Well, I'm going to stay up late at night dreaming about how to help you achieve those things. And it's not just because I'm a good guy that cares about you. Like, it's true that over time, hopefully we'll learn to care for each other, right? We'll spend enough time together and we'll do what we say we're going to do, and we'll build mutual respect and trust. But the main reason I'm going to do that is because I would like to continue working in the NBA, and I would like for you to play so well that my boss recognizes that I have helped in some small way create an environment where you've been able to grow and succeed. And there's nothing wrong with that. Being upfront about those incentives and then being willing to also identify where our incentives might not match up. I think that is a really key part of almost any relationship, but certainly a business one, a collegial one, where, look, if the general manager asks me my opinion about you, guess what? I'm going to tell him the truth. Even if that means I say things that aren't in your best interest. I imagine you would do the same, right? I respect the fact that you should do the same. But in the meantime, let's try to make those conversations, those hypothetical conversations, easier for each other, right? Let's try to actually help each other. Let's try to identify ways that we're falling short for each other and then fix them so that we aren't in a position to say, yeah, we need to trade this bum, or yeah, Weaver's an idiot, we got to get him out of here. So being open of having those conversations and being really clear about what are we doing and why are we doing it, I think can only build trust and improve your odds of achieving these really difficult things.
Yeah, it's like communication internally versus externally, and I think that's not versus, but as well as, those two things are important. And it's actually a good segue to communication, although communication was supposed to be the third quarter, but I'm just going to flip-flop because it was a perfect segue for that. And since it's my metaverse, I can do whatever I want.
You're a professional podcaster, dude.
I'm not professional. I'm not.
Professional.
So communication. That's one thing that I was also curious about when you're saying you're talking to a player, and how would you differentiate communicating with a player as an assistant coach and communicating with a player as a head coach? Because there's two different roles that you occupy, and there's a certain amount. Some coaches differentiate within the distance, like they want to keep a certain amount of distance as a head coach. I don't know if I necessarily would do that to a degree, maybe, but I think that, as you said, it's still, you have to be yourself and honest and authentic. You know, there's no, like, you can't just put on a front and then be one guy, especially if they know you as an assistant and you become a head coach, all of a sudden you're a different person. They can't be right. So how would you differentiate those two things, communicating as an assistant coach and as a head coach?
I think you've nailed the heart of the matter, which is you won't go very far trying to be something you're not. And so my nature, as we talked about, me viewing things through the lens of being a part of a team. My friend Luke Longley, who I worked with not only with the national team, but also with the Sydney Kings, he said, your coaching is very conspiratorial at one point. And he's like, and I mean that in a really positive way. Like you're always conspiring with the player to try to help them, to try to break through something, to identify a weakness in the opponent or a vulnerability in them that could be exploited by the opponent, or showing vulnerability in yourself in a way that helps them connect with you more deeply. And I think that's just how my natural personality manifests itself is, during games, sometimes I don't know what the score is. I don't have a very clear idea of what the score is, especially earlier in the game. And the reason why is because it's just like pretty far down the list of things that I'm focused on. I'm focused on what can I do to help next? Like, what can I do to help? And so as a head coach, right, your view is a little bit wider, and it's like, what can I do to help the team next? And of course, individuals are a part of that team. But as an assistant coach, oftentimes your responsibilities are directed towards specific individual players or specific parts of the game. And so, for instance, with the Rockets, I focused on this last season, Alperen Şengün, KJ Martin, and Jae'Sean Tate. And so for those three players, I was in communication with them during games. I was anticipating things that perhaps confirmed stuff that we had watched on film previously or talked about previously, or things maybe that went against the 99% rule of stuff that we'd established, that this is one of those nights where that's actually not going to work, and it's because of this referee or because of this opponent we're playing. When I was the head coach, I was trying to think more about what substitution can I make? What do I want to slow us down to try to organize something and have a play call out of things? Is this, what I'm watching right now, something that we need to address moving forward? Is it going to keep us from achieving what we're trying to achieve? And so all of those things, those areas of focus stem directly from the work that I did to try to understand, much like we talked about at the team level, like what are the priorities that we're trying to achieve, and how can my behavior right now honor those? And if I'm spending a lot of time worrying about something that's maybe not even on the team priority list or is way down the list, then that feels like a waste of time to me. In Philadelphia, when I worked there, our general manager was really clear in a way that helped, I think, a lot of us, which was, we're trying to find a star or help someone become good enough so that they could be traded for someone that could become a star. And that really helped, because when we found ourselves caught up in tiny little discussions about players that weren't likely to be traded for someone that could become a star or weren't likely to become stars themselves, it helped redirect us to say, okay, but has anyone talked to Joel in the last couple of hours? Like that was an obvious thing that we needed to sort of move back up our priority list.
Mm-hmm. So like when you say you're talking to players as an assistant coach, for example, and you have to relay certain information to them, or when you are presenting a report or a scout to the team, do you have certain methods for, or a certain idea of how information can be retained the best in terms of like remembering? Because there's so much information to be obtained, it has to be filtered out throughout the process, right? So the information we give to the players is not necessarily the full amount. You're just filtering, so it's easier to kind of build the idea of what they're going to face, what they're going to see. Is there a certain method you feel is mostly effective in helping them retain the information?
I think this area is the area that I have enjoyed the deep, dark hole of obsession over the last 5 or 6 years more than any other. And just realizing how far ahead other practitioners were, teachers, soccer coaches, you know, all sorts of folks that had studied the modern evidence on these subjects and codified a set of principles that are backed by neuroscience. And I think that hasn't permeated into basketball to the degree that it has some other sports. And I think there's a real edge in coaches working to understand how memory works, and you know, identifying memory as the residue of effortful remembering. Like that is a fundamental paradigm shift that if you don't think of it through that lens, then you will struggle to create the kinds of learning opportunities that help players transfer things from short-term memory into long-term memory. So recall practice is like the gold standard, the number one thing that you're trying to offer up to people all the time. Trying to remember something is forming the connections in the brain that will allow you to hold on to it in a sturdy enough pattern that it can exist in perpetuity. And it seems to be unlimited, our long-term memory. And so the effect of me saying, what's that referee's name to one of our players, and letting him struggle to try to remember that referee's name is so much more impactful at helping that player eventually know that referee by sight than me saying, hey, remember that referee is Tony Brothers. So just that simple change, and that way that unrolls over the thousands of hours you spend along with each other. And then when you get players to understand how to create those opportunities for themselves and to appreciate that struggling to remember something actually is learning it, then you can get into spacing and interleaving and the ways that practice design, scouting reports, you know, even the way you look at game film, right? Like in the NBA, games are the practices. And so the game spaces and interleaves concepts for you. So that I think is a really helpful way to, one, kind of readjust the way we look at games and look at them as the learning opportunities that they are. But two, if you're not doing that, then I think you're going to struggle to get enough opportunities for recall practice in your day-to-day life as an NBA player, NBA coach together in order to make the gains that you need to make.
It's different for every player though, right? Like this, there can't be like a common denominator for everybody. I think not a perfect one anyways, but because the attention span is getting shorter, it feels like for years now, it's really important to be as precise and as digestible as possible. It can't be, you know, like the video sessions have to be short and sweet. They have to be right to the spot. Then there's a lot of individual sessions you have to have really precise clips that illustrate exactly the problem that you're trying to address, and not just have pointless clips. I struggled with that when I was also in the beginning to put a video report together of the whole team, especially when we played Australia, because there's so many different situations, but you have to get to the core of things and address maybe certain principles that explain it better in the sense of rules, right? So you can't really show 20 plays. You got to show maybe the main like 3-4 different situations instead of precise plays that with a team like yours, for example, that was running more situational and read and react kind of type of offenses where you maybe address certain angles or certain situations, certain screens of how to guard, and not really like this play call, we're going to do this play call, we're going to do this. You just certainly, like, at some point the players will not remember everything. It's the assistant coach's job to remember those parts and to give the player on the floor immediately the idea of what he's going to face. He's not going to remember if you're going to say fist out or whatever. He's not going to remember that, you know. So I think that there's a lot of small little rules you have to make for your own team. I think, and every team is different, to get through to them and to get the information retained as quickly as possible, because especially in the NBA, the turnaround of games is so quickly. You have to face a lot of different situations, and they have to understand from night to night what's coming at them.
I totally agree that trying to get through to anyone, your audience, is a necessary part of communicating, convincing, educating, sharing with anyone, right? The barriers that exist, though, sometimes have been created by the good intentions of previous coaches and teachers that just happen to be wrong. And one of the ways that that's the case is this idea of like learning styles, that there are kinesthetic learners and there are audio learners and there are visual learners. And there just isn't evidence for this. And so it's the kind of thing that appeals to us because it sort of speaks to our individuality and speaks to the very mysterious brain that we are all lucky to get to enjoy and struggle against. But the way the brain holds on to information is the way that all brains hold on to information, and that at least neurotypical brains. And so for us as coaches, I think we're doing a disservice to our players if we don't understand what modern science has helped us sort of appreciate about our brains, that these are neurons, and this is myelin, and this is how these things interact in order to form memories. And maybe we'll feel differently about this in 5 or 6 years, right? But what we know today as compared to 10 years ago is vastly, vastly different. And 10 years before that is just another totally different universe. And so I would change the focus from the individualization of these strategies to players, and instead try to meet that player where they're at on their sort of journey to understand learning, frame the stakes, right? This is LeBron James, right? Maybe the smartest basketball player to ever live. What makes him the smartest basketball player? Like what are the things that he does? Oh, well, he knows all our plays. He knows all the play calls. Okay, cool. Would you like to know more of the play calls? Would you like other teams to look at you as one of the smartest players in the league? Do you think that's helped his brand? Do you think it would help your brand? Do you think it would make your life easier? Do you think it would help us win games? Each person is going to respond to one of those things more favorably than another. But that motivation piece is quite different person to person. The mechanisms by which information is retained is not, at least it doesn't seem to be. And so there's a great tweet earlier today from Doug Lemov that I have pulled up here, which I think speaks to your issue of the attention spans, which is constantly switching from low stimuli, high value activities to high stimuli, low value activities at the slightest hint of boredom or cognitive challenge teaches your mind to never tolerate an absence of novelty. And that connects to this idea to me, which is that all of us are using, are offered the chance to use interruptions to break our effortful engagement with things. And effortful engagement is really the key in order to grow your brain, your muscles, like that, the effortful engaging in a way that is slightly, not sometimes more than slightly, difficult, challenging. That is eustress. That is what we're after. And those that are able to learn to notice when they are growing through that challenge, learn to love the challenge. And those that learn to pivot to something else that's not as challenging are put in a really disadvantageous position when they're trying to compete against the world's best at anything.
It's I mean, mostly it's referring to social media, probably, you know, like it's the I heard that expression before. I don't remember who said it. It's monkey brain, you know, where you're jumping from one task to another, and you're jumping from one idea to another, and it's always like your task shifting all the time, and that also, you know, like just takes away from your focus at the task at hand. So
you're training your brain, right?
Yes,
you're training your brain whether you're trying to or not, and so it's good to realize that, and then choose the things you want to train your brain to do.
Exactly.
You aren't your brain as much as it seems like you are, right? Like you are.
It's a muscle.
A tool at your disposal.
It's a muscle. It's a muscle of a kind that you, I mean, not literally, but it's a muscle in metaphorical sense of that you're still training it.
And I love that metaphor because I think because exercise science has been around it's not as different today as it was 30 years ago as compared to neuroscience. Many of those truths have already been absorbed by players and coaches. And so how much stronger will your bicep get if you lift a 1 kilogram weight 1,000 times? The answer is not that much stronger. And so why, right? And how does that relate as a metaphor to what we're trying to do shooting? How much better will you get as a jump shooter shooting uncontested, slow motion, catch and shoot 3-pointers, a million of them? The answer is not that much better if you're already an NBA player. And so what is do we want more weight? Do we want someone to be pushing you occasionally while you're lifting the weight? Do we want you to put the rest of your body in an uncomfortable position? Do we want somebody to throw the weight onto you before you start lifting it? Like, those are the interventions that we can make that apply to your muscles, apply to your brain, and apply to the skills that there's some difference between information transfer and motor learning, but much of it is analogous. And I think the sort of weightlifting, conditioning, exercise science is often a good place for coaches to start when you're working with an athlete and trying to help them understand how getting better at something works across different areas of sport.
So we're going slowly into coaching, and even though I still had a couple of topics I wanted to go through, but we're progressing very, very, very good. So now we're gonna go into the coaching quarter, and that's the third quarter for now. And because of your experiences throughout those levels I talked about, you also had transition periods of roles, different roles: special assistant, assistant coach, head coach, back to assistant coach. And if we just want to, because there's also labels attached to each role, right? Like if you stay within the team and you're progressing from scout to assistant coach to head coach, or you transfer teams, you still have to establish yourself as an assistant and then transition to a head coach at a different team and then transition back to an assistant coach on a different team again. What did you find yourself struggle with the most? Let's say from assistant coach to head coach, what was the biggest adjustment? And then when you reverted back from being a head coach to an assistant coach at the NBA level, what was the struggle that you found yourself, or not, but battling with the most?
I remember early on in my time in Long Island, one of the earlier sessions, maybe it was the first session that I was running. It was before our sort of training camp started, but we had some guys working out in the gym and we were trying to sort of incorporate some things before we got going. And we were doing something that I just thought was terrible. Like, it just wasn't playing out the way that we had hoped it would when we sort of talked about what we were going to do that day. I was like, somebody's got to, like, this sucks. We got to stop this. I was like, wait, no, I got to stop this. That's my job. Like, I was like, hey, stop. Like, this ain't it. Like, this is not what we're trying to do. Let me help you understand why we're doing this. And that difference is really key, right? Like, not only did it help me appreciate the degree to which I needed to be a little bit more, I guess, take ownership over what we were doing as the head coach.
We're back to self-awareness again.
Yeah, that's true. And it also shined a light on, I thought, maybe the shortcomings in environments where I had been previously that I had not had that instinct before. Like, it made me want to create the environment as a head coach where player, assistant coach, trainer, that anyone could march onto the court and be like, this is not it. Like, no way is this what we're trying to achieve? And over the several years that I was a head coach in different contexts, national team, professional, international FIBA competition, GLeague, I'm really proud of how many times we got moments like that, where a player said, this is bullshit. Like, we're not achieving what we want to achieve with this, what we're doing right here. And that was great. And not even half as enjoyable, or I think it's beneficial, as all the times that, Andrew Bogut said, boys, if we keep doing this, we're going to be a fucking problem. Like, that was a session that can get us where we want to go. And, an NBA champion, a first overall draft pick, like, of course it was his role to say that, but Sean Bruce, Didi Luzada, Jay Sean Tate, second year professional, like, each of them had different moments like that. Daniel Kickert, had played in Europe forever. Like, each of those guys, when they realized that this was going to be an environment where not only was that encouraged, but it was expected, their engagement increased. And that's what I was feeling in that moment, right? My engagement was increasing now as the head coach, because I realized, I didn't realize that I wasn't as engaged before. But now as a head coach, I realized that there was another gear to go up to, where I felt direct ownership over what was going on, and responsibility to make sure that it was purposeful and along the lines of what we were trying, focused in the right direction.
Yes, engagement is a good word. And I feel like as an assistant also, there's certain, I think like there's a lot of still in Europe, old school disengagement by the assistants, just because the head coaching figure is so dominant, and they don't want their assistants to be too engaged because of the potential threat, which is, I think it's an old mentality, and it's insecurities basically. And I think that needs to, like,
not just Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be removed. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, yeah. But that's where I saw it the most. But so there's complexes, there's insecurity that I think needs to be eradicated by the head coach. And it takes time. It takes time also for the more the more knowledge, and maybe the achievements also help to feel you secure, to make you feel secure. And then you allow your assistant coaches to be also more engaged in practices and video sessions, to talk, and up to a certain degree, obviously, like, as long as they're not talking out of their minds, something they're not supposed to talk about, but which I've seen also. But as when you were an assistant coach, and you're obviously like your mind works like a head coach. By talking to you, it's obviously like that you have a head coaching mindset because of the experiences you had. But when did you know as an assistant coach that you were ready to be a head coach? Was there like a certain period that you were like this is the step now, like logically the next step, and where you feel like the engagement, you had your own ideas, and you've kind of like, was there a moment where you felt like, I can't be an assistant coach anymore?
No, I was always focused on choosing jobs for the learning they were going to offer. That was always my focus. And when people said, what do you want to do? Like, what's the kind of role, especially when I joined the NBA, right? There's all these roles. I don't know what any of them are. I don't have any, I have no clue. I'm such an outsider from that world, much the same way as I was from the NCAA, right? I didn't play in an NCAA program. So I don't know what the hell a graduate assistant is, or a video coordinator, or a special assistant to the whatever, like, and that was a real asset, because I just didn't care about any of that. And so I was, each time I said, all right, where can I learn the most? I've been at Texas for a number of years. I was a high school coach. I think being around college players, I will learn more. I think I can learn by seeing what that program looks like, and the difference of going from a 3-coach team to a 10-coach team, and the fact that the University of Texas is in my town, and I can maybe get access to their summer camps. Maybe I can learn from doing that. Okay, I've been at Texas for 4 years. I've helped plan recruiting visits. I've helped organize academic transcripts for Canadian All-Americans. I've been around Kevin Durant and Didier Augustine and all these guys. Now I want to be an assistant coach that goes and recruits on the road. I want to be an assistant coach. I want to be one of the main guys that has a big voice and helps run player development sessions. And now I saw how much I learned from pros. I want to be around pros. Each time, that is what I was seeking, not I can't be a graduate assistant anymore, or I can't be an assistant coach anymore. It was always, God, being a G League head coach would be such a rich learning experience. God, going to the NBL would be an incredible learning experience.
You see growth
each time. That was the yeah, it's like one of the only things you can control, I think.
Yeah, you see seeking growth. I feel like that I read just the quote. I'm not so bad with quotes. I wish I was so good with quotes, but I'm so terribly bad with quotes.
Flashcard.
Yeah, that's another learning by doing and engaging my brain in a different way. Is that, like, lessons that you learn, they don't mean anything unless you apply them. And I don't remember who said that in a certain sense, but you have to be able to, like, also apply them at the next level and then with the next different role. So essentially you're learning to have also a bigger role at some point. It's not just like being I want to be a lifetime learner, but you also at some point you want to apply those lessons that you've learned. Sure. In those particular points where you see they should be applied.
Absolutely. And I will say that your career cycles, I think, between opportunities for more learning through observation and more learning through doing. And I felt like Texas had a lot of learning through observation. I thought Sam Houston had a lot of learning through doing. I thought that my years in Philly had a lot of learning through observation. G League head coaching, learning through doing. So I do think that's an appropriate way to finding a balance between those things is really good, because you say, ooh, I'm stealing that idea. I'm stealing that idea. I would never do it that way. I would never do it that way. And then you try it and you say, man, I know I said I would never do it that way, but I think I'm about to do it that way. Or, God, I thought this was going to work like gangbusters, and it just didn't. And so getting to run those little A/B tests does help you, I think, track towards your own sort of eventual upside, whatever that is, as a practitioner.
So, as a head coach, just to go back to on the coaching part and applying, especially after games, the two questions to ask yourself, and I would like to know what you ask yourself, or is there something you ask yourself? One, A, after a win, and B, after a loss. Is there a certain
Never
question?
Different. I just am obsessed about the sort of process that you're using to judge yourself being the same no matter what the outcome is, and that you can't allow yourself to get tricked by the variance of anything, luck, shooting, fouls, referees, water coming down from the ceiling. You can't get tricked. There's just a lot of variables. And so not as the head coach in particular, what we talked about earlier, you're the one that creates the environment where or is responsible for the environment. And so if you allow yourself to go to those dark places and start to say, God, he missed that shot and he's such a coward and he never could help us win, then that is what you are essentially tacitly rewarding as well. And so if a staff member brings that sort of spirit to the conversation, as opposed to, we flubbed this, like getting that play call of that player, like, the huddle before that in the game ATO was rushed. Like I couldn't understand what you were saying. That might not be immediately after the game, but we did set in Sydney a goal to every single game identify something that we did wrong as a coaching staff, and then create a system to make sure that we wouldn't get that wrong again. And I just stole it from Ray Dalio, Bridgewater, like one of the great investors of all time, who as soon as an issue came up, you addressed it, you owned up to it. I keep forgetting that in FIBA at the quarter, the ball comes in at half court. So I keep drawing these plays as full court ATOs and the fucking ball is at half court. Like, all right, fellas, next time I do that, I got to roll the dice, which was our punishment system. And with Sydney, it was, you had to clean the kitchen, you had to do a skit, you had to do 20 push-up, so it was a dice roll, automatic dice roll. I must have done that 3 or 4 times, and then I corrected it. But by engaging with it that way, I was creating some accountability for myself, but I was also, I think more importantly, showing that was what we were going to reward, were people acknowledging their screw ups and then creating a system by which they could improve it. And so it was like, Adam Ford, my assistant, I need the ball I want you to draw the ball where it is on the court at quarter breaks so that I don't pretend like it's full court because my NBA brain is working, right?
Yeah, it creates a system of accountability, and I think like leading by example. That's just an example that you and I want to be. I would want my players to have the same. Like admitting to mistakes is a strength, not a weakness. And there's still a lot of like where like there's so much perfectionism out there where nobody wants to admit to any kind of mistake they did. And we're just all humans. We're not robots. We're making mistakes left and right. Like nobody knows how to do anything. Like everybody's making up parenthood as they go. Like they're trying to. I don't have kids. I don't know, but I know that people talk about us like, oh, we're gonna do like this and reading books and like nobody knows. And our parents didn't know what they were doing. They were just like doing it, so I think that admitting to those little mistakes that you do, that admitting and showing that you're willing to admit it, I think it creates a good culture.
And I think that acknowledging that any expert practitioner, I mean, there are so many incredible coaches that I will never stack up to as an individual as an X's and O's person, or someone in the way that they interact with the refs, or someone that handles the press conference, or all the little sub games within the game of being a head coach. The list is longer than I'd like to admit, but of course, Messina, Djordjevic, on and on and on, right? Saras, EuroLeague guys, GLeague guys, NBA guys, college guys. I know them all too well. There's some really good freaking coaches across this planet. And I also think that it's crazy to ever think that you could do it all yourself. Yeah. You can't. You just can't do it well. You can't do everything well if you do it by yourself. And so what you said earlier about environments where the assistant coaches are maybe reticent to jump in, what essentially you're doing is you're just lowering the ceiling for how good you can be as a coaching staff. And ultimately, I think players recognize that, and they might really appreciate your X's and O's wisdom, but they, I think, can understand once they've played more than one place that there is more to it.
There's levels.
Who knows, right? And it's the getting all these things going together and the synergy and the sort of not the virtuous cycles that can be created, the feedback loops in a positive direction are what create great players and create the opportunities to win championships. And the negative feedback loop of us environment being created where the assistant coaches or the players feel nervous to contribute something that they think will help the team, that is, I think, its own kind of vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's like that. Like you said, the more you travel, the more you've been around, like the more you, like, especially players, the more they go around, it broadens their horizon and they realize that there's levels to everything. Like a rookie coming to Europe is a completely, hopefully, a different mindset, a different idea of basketball 5 years down the line, because he's just experienced different coaches, different cultures, different ideas of doing things. And there's not one truth. There can't be one way of doing things. There's always different ways of doing things on each team, because each team changes and you're learning your team, I think, from not from scratch necessarily, but every year you're learning your team again, to get a feel for them. And
can I ask you a question, Dennis? I know it's your podcast, but
of course,
you get a chance to interview like these incredible coaches that I'm such a fan of from afar. Is there somebody that you've interviewed on this podcast where the other cool part about your job is you see a lot of environments up close and personal, and can kind of compare and contrast? Is there anybody that you've interviewed where the synergy between them and their coaching staff and maybe their team as a group was one of the most impressive parts of them, rather than any sort of individual trait that they might have had that made you say, wow, that person's an incredible motivator, or incredible communicator, incredible strategist, but that it seemed that there was that they had done their part to create the environment where everyone was pushing together really effectively?
Well, I can tell you from experience, not necessarily from talking to the coaches on the podcast, but from working, as well as like, if I use the example of Messina, when working with Messina and having him experience it for the first time of how to give your staff a voice. and how to give everyone accountability, responsibilities, but also giving them a voice, and being secure to allowing your staff members to be different than you. You want them to be completely different. You want a chameleon in each staff to have something, like, to avoid groupthink, basically. So I think with Messina, it was it was prevalent that all the assistants were different. And we had, my first year, for example, me as a Lithuanian, Coach Messina as Italian, Quinn as an American, and then Coach Shakulin as a Russian. And we had like we had 4 different mindsets, cultures, backgrounds. You have to really find a way to also communicate, but also absorb information. And you want them to be different. You want them to think different. And with those, that year, it grew, and it morphed, again, going back to the word morphing. And I think it's really relevant for staffs as well. From the guys that I interviewed, I thought that also Coach Trinchieri was different in terms of expressing himself, just because of the metaphorical thinking and the multicultural background that he has. I could relate to that a lot because of the different backgrounds in my life, and the way he expresses himself through metaphorical examples. It's a very specific way of getting through to the players, getting through to the staff, and identifying certain issues by painting a different picture. And when you paint a different picture, there's a certain aha effect that comes with it, and you kind of it's a different way of learning. You like you said, there's visual learners, but you also can paint a vision and paint a picture in a word sense, like in a metaphor, and that creates a completely different awe. So I think he's different in that sense, also because of talking to him a lot. There's a different way of how he gets this point across. So
everybody go listen to episode 212, Andrea Trinchieri.
Was it 12? You're good. I think.
Oh, I don't know. I'm just trying to plug your podcast, man.
I think it was 12. Let me look. I think Messina was number 1 for sure. That's a no-brainer. I'm gonna look it up now just because it's I should know which episode Trinchieri was.
You had some killers.
Yeah, and we're gonna continue to bring him as well. He was 14, actually. He was close.
Amazing.
Yeah. So before we move on to the personal part, there was one more question I wanted to ask in the coach's sense, because a lot of coaches also deal with the pressure. Head coaches, in particular, deal with the pressure, deal with the expectations, and you also have to have a strong mindset and character. Have you ever experienced negative self-talk? And if yes, how did you get through that aspect of your season, for example? Because there's losing streaks that everybody has to handle, and then you starting to blame yourself. You always have to look at yourself first before you look at the players, right? Like what did I do wrong? How could I help my team better? And then the trickle down effect and the snowball effect starts to take over. Did you ever experience that, and did you get through it?
So this speaks, I guess, to my relative brief head coaching career, 2 seasons, right? We went to the finals both years. We led the league in record both years. We had exceptionally successful years from a win-loss standpoint. We were the best defense in the league. Like, the difference between us and number 2 was bigger than the difference between like number 2 and number 7, I think, in the NBL. We led the league the entire season, never been done before. So I say that not to brag, but just to sort of highlight that I didn't have a lot of opportunities to feel like the world was caving in. Mm-hmm. And yet within each season, I think the thing that I would imagine that by now, after coaching for this is my 19th year coaching, I'm consistently surprised at how long the season is every year. Every year I find myself being like, man, the season is long. Like, there are so many things that happen in any season, whether the season is a 2-month World Cup campaign or a 9-month NBA Finals appearance. There's players get hurt, players get cut, players are out of the rotation, players fight their way back into the rotation, friends become enemies, enemies become friends. Like, it just really is like that the intensity sort of dilates the time experience for everyone. So there were lots of high stake decisions. I can't remember a time where I started to go to a dark place because I thought we weren't going to be good enough, or I thought I was going to get fired, or one of these kind of things. And I was very intentional about organizing my life in a way that kept my wife and son at the center of it. And so, I think I know from my peers, this, we had these great catch-ups and clinics and self sort of development talks during COVID, right, with friends around the world in different sports. And that's something I've always enjoyed doing. And I've been lucky enough to do that with you on a couple of continents at a couple of different dinner tables. But my friends typically say during the season, I go to just ignore my family, ignore my health, that's the sort of default position. And I'm so grateful that of all the gifts I've been given by my mentors, Rick Barnes at Texas, Jason Hooten at Sam Houston State, Brett Brown in Philadelphia, Kenny Atkinson in Brooklyn, I was always with them. I was with those guys all the time. And they were incredibly gracious with the degree to which they were vulnerable in front of me, because on many of those teams, we lost a lot of games. We were in teams with a lot of youth that we were trying to grow into as good of players as we could get to. We were trying to find stars, develop stars. And each of those guys had different times of success and struggle with their own sort of energy levels and communication ability and the degree to which they were taking care of themselves in terms of sleep and exercise and diet. Being next to those guys just highlighted how important it is to not, oh yeah, that's important, right? Like that's not how actually important things get done. Actually important things get done have robust systems around them. So, when I got home, there was a period of time I was unreachable to my staff members with the Sydney Kings because I was picking my son up from daycare, or I was walking with my wife on the beach, or cooking dinner, or going to the grocery store, or whatever else. And then after dinner happened, that was the time that I kicked into reviewing the work that my staff had prepared at that time for us to plan practice the next day and send out whatever we were going to send out to the players. And so it took a couple of months to sort of get to that place. But once we got to that place, that was the system. We're going to review practice. We're going to prepare the film for the next day. We employed a flipped classroom model where we would send film out for guys to look at on their own time as individuals rather than watch it as a group in person, in part because of how ineffective I think lectures are largely. So that became our system that ensured I had family time, ensured that I was able to recenter myself, reflect on the day, and get excited again to prepare for the next day and get all that stuff done that night so that people could then prepare themselves and understand this is going to be the theme of practice, and this is going to be this is the message of the film that we sent out, and this is what we're going to need to cover with the opponent scouting that we're going to do on the court tomorrow. That I feel like is something that can easily get lost in all the priorities that you're trying to achieve, is that it's not enough to say my family is a priority or my health or my exercise. It's like, no, I'm going to work out every single day before I see anybody, or before I look at my phone, or as soon as practice is over, or before I go to sleep, or whatever it is. Like if it's really important to you, making that your rule, supporting it with behaviors that keep it consistent is, I think, the only way to achieve almost anything.
So you're like, there's a lot of things come to mind. Like you're basically setting rules for your own system. You create your own system of communication with the assistant coaches as a head coach, but also you're trying to be cognizant as an assistant coach of what the head coach needs. Yes. in terms of being supportive, because I think that's also, again, with self-awareness and understanding and empathy for the head coaching position. And especially now, after you went from head coach to assistant coach, you probably had also a different understanding of what the head coach wants and what the head coach needs. And that's what I've learned also, that the support system around the head coach is very important, to have the right people around you to really pick you up when you're down, and also to keep the levels going, keep the right levels, keep the balance, engage and support each other in various ways, because essentially it becomes your family. Like you said, you're immersed so much in that, but you also read my mind. We're going into the fourth quarter with the personal part, and you already talked about what I wanted to talk about, the work-life balance of how to do it. Basically, you said it, you're creating a system, you're shut yourself off, you to put it as a priority for that day or for that time period, the family as a priority, and then you go back to being a coach and preparing yourself for the next day for practice as a priority. So you chopped it up already. It's you're a true mind reader. But another thing that I wanted to touch on in the personal aspect, was there a sliding door moment in your life where you felt like this could have worked out a different way, that you could have went a different direction in I mean, is one specific moment where, like, not coaching but something else?
Oh, separate from coaching?
Yeah.
Well, I guess a big one was I was an assistant at a Division I school called Sam Houston State as my wife was finishing her medical school training. And in America, there's a residency that you apply for and you go where you get in. It's like you match with a program. They rank you, you rank programs, and where you match is where you get sent. And there's not a lot of flexibility on, there's like no flexibility on what you match into. And so she matched to a place where we had no friends, no job prospects, a city we had no familiarity with, Philadelphia. And the decision was, am I going to continue to work at Sam Houston State, or am I going to try to go with her and be unemployed and figure out what's next, or some sort of half measure maybe where I get a new job where it's, you know, partially in Philadelphia. And I just took it as an opportunity to chase what I really wanted to chase, which was being with an MBA program. And I knew that the people that worked in the NBA knew things that I wanted to learn. And the only real interaction I'd had with them to that point were a few conversations with staffers, but really it was just being around players that ended up as NBA players and might come back to Texas from time to time. And I knew I had learned so much more from Kevin Durant and DJ Augustine and Royal Ivy and these guys than any player has ever learned from me. So I was like, if I can just be around those guys more, I'm going to learn a ton. And so how do I get to that? Well, I don't know. I have a year to figure out how to do that. And so it became its own little problem solving exercise to try how to spend this year in a way that gets someone to give me an opportunity to be part of an NBA team. And I had lots of different little projects during the year, some advanced scouting, some personnel scouting, some projects for different members of different teams. But I got crazy lucky that the general manager and head coach that came to Philadelphia the following year wanted to bring me in and gave me the opportunities that they gave me. But I am so grateful that I chose to stay with my wife in a physical sense, move to a place, take that sort of risk. Such risk, right? Because in our relationship,
well, it is a professional risk. It is
professional risk. That's right. Yeah. Which we should all, I think, calibrate on being less important than it oftentimes feels like. Yeah. So that dynamic, you know, as a physician, she has been chasing something very difficult for a very long time. And I've been chasing something very difficult for a very long time. And so there's been symmetry in how we've been trying to achieve that together. But it wasn't a gesture. It wasn't a gesture to go with her to Philadelphia. It was what I thought was best for our team, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of mentality we've applied as a team to move to New York, to apply to a fellowship at Columbia, to move to Australia, to move back here to Houston, many different, to have a child together, like many different times we have used that sort of, all right, what's best for our team? And appreciating that one of her graduation speakers, she's had like 9 degrees. So like one of them, they're, you know, usually miserable exercises, but eventually you get one speaker who actually is compelling. Talked about how work-life balance is nonsense. It's never balanced, right? Like the idea that some sort of 50-50 seesaw, like, of course not, right? First of all, if you have a spouse, there's 2 of you. So the metaphor sort of falls apart there. But when one person is pushing professionally, maybe, or in a period of time that's particularly intense, the other partner is going to have to do things that balance that out, right? From familial sense, maybe from who's cooking dinner, maybe from who's watching the kids. But it's not always, it doesn't always have to be like that, right? It could be in certain relationships, that might work. But it might be times that this other person is in a period of time that's super intense, studying for exams, in the NBA playoffs, going to the Olympics. And so being sort of open about that as a couple and communicating about, look, this period of time is going to be super intense for us. It's the draft, we're working on a lot of players, we have the number one overall pick, whatever it is, like, let's just acknowledge that. And then let's set up some systems to support that. Should we order out food more? Should we have a family visit more often? Should we separate some specific dates where we know we're going to get to go on a date with each other to catch up, to make sure we don't lose track of that? You can see, like, this is how I think this is like a key to life, at least for me and my family, is identify the important stuff, come up with some systems to support that, and then make that the expectation. Like, that's how I think good outcomes are more likely than how you can dodge some of the worst outcomes. That's it.
And I like to bring it back full circle.
I'm on host, Dennis.
Back to the first part that we talked about, creating a North Star, identifying it, communicating it, not like with a coach and manager, but in a couple's relationship. And then it's a yin and a yang. You kind of it's like a wave, basically, right? Like it's one hits the other, and one is up, the other one is down, but you still support each other and you create systems to achieve those goals together. And that's when, like, you can put the metaphor together as a coach within the club as well. Love it. Okay, all right, let's move on to the ATOs. You ready?
Ready.
I got 5. I'm finishing lineup, right? We're going for, like, we're putting the last 5 together here, putting it out on the court, and it's bang bang. We've been chopping up for over an hour, so now it's game time. So one book that impacted you the most?
Multiple Systems, I think it was titled, the Dean Smith book, that the foreword was written by Dick Spear from the Air Force Academy, but, you know, way ahead of his time, 60s, talking about what is efficient basketball, how can you bring a spirit to the game and marry it with a style of play that's variable and difficult to prepare for, and not be all different, you know, spread too thin, trying to do a million different things at once. Hugely impactful as he approached his basketball life, and appreciating how he organized his personal life and how civically involved and responsible and the kind of leader that he was.
It was say the name again. Multiple.
Dean Smith. Multiple. I think it was called Multiple Offenses and Defenses. I think.
Okay. Okay. Best non-basketball Twitter follow.
I will say, I'll give Doug Lemov some love.
I say Doug, D-O.
Doug Lemov, Lemov, wrote an incredible book, The Guide to Coach, Teacher's Guide to Coaching, I think it's called. A must read, absolutely pivotal, modern learning science applied to coaching. He's an educator of educators. Must follow, but I couldn't recommend that book highly enough.
Follow, done and dusted. Teach Like a Champion 3.0, reading reconsidered. Coach's Guide.
It's called the Coach's Guide to Teaching.
Yeah, Coach's Guide to Teaching. Yep. All right, everybody. Next one. Best hack to calm down after a game. We took an incredible trip to Los Angeles with the Brooklyn Nets and spent time at the Red Bull headquarters there. And they took us out, gave us a surfing lesson. And on the beach afterwards, one of the guys, his real job was a breathing coach. He worked with free divers, he worked with big wave surfers, and he did a breathe up with us, which is just a protocol where he was like, we're going to teach you how to hold your breath for a long time. Anybody want to try? And we all laid on the sand and
Rondé Hollis Jefferson and Joe Harris and myself and a couple other guys tried it. And, I've scuba dived before, but I didn't have any kind of training over and beyond that. And I'd never focused on trying to hold my breath before. And over the course of 10 minutes, this guy puts us through this breathing protocol and helps me hold my breath for over 4 minutes. And I got done and I was like, how the hell did you do that? Like, what sort of voodoo witchcraft, right? Like, it defied understanding. And I was like, and what else do you know, right? So then we started talking about how can breathing interact with our anxiety or our anger or whatever sort of feelings that we're feeling and we feel out of control. He's like, well, surely you've been exposed to like, SWAT teams and like special forces, like you've heard kind of their breathing protocols. Like, no, I never heard any of this. And so he taught us a few of these kinds of techniques that are really easy to find online if you want to, like breathing protocol or breathe ups. But simple little 8-12 second things that sometimes involve expelling all the air out of your lungs, maybe breathing in, holding it, clenching everything super tight, and then breathing out again. And oftentimes, in less than 10 seconds, you can go from a state of agitation or anger or whatever it is to something closer to normal, rational, however normal and rational you get on a regular basis.
Breathing is number one. I discovered the Wim Hof method years ago, but then also I got into box breathing. I got into different types of breathing just for different purposes. But that's also calm you down, or like Wim Hof is really to amp you up a little bit, combined with a cold shower. And there's a lot of hacks with breathing that you can do, and I recommend for people to find out what they like, whatever fits them. There's not necessarily one truth. So everybody needs to get on breathing methods for their own sake. Fourth one, power forward now for you. That's, we went from point guard now to power forward. Hardest thing you had to overcome to get to where you are today?
Well, I'll take the professional angle. So I think that there's a degree to which I'll always feel like an outsider. I wasn't a championship level professional player. I've had many amazing colleagues that were, and I've learned endless amount from them. And I've heard Coach Messina talk about this quite eloquently himself, not being a championship level professional player, and that there will always be a degree to which he must remember that he does not know what the player is experiencing in the locker room before a big game, because he has not lived it. But that the flip side to that is it's such a gift to not assume that you know what that player is experiencing, because it's how you experienced it as a player in those championship moments. And so I think each of us has to learn to bring the self-awareness to appreciate that each of us are individuals on this strange journey, and that we ought to be interacting with each other with a great deal of empathy, and should very, very, very rarely bring our past experiences into the equation in a way that we think makes us, in a way that makes us any more confident than just slightly curious as to whether they're having the same experience that we have.
And last one, this is a Tim Ferriss question that I ask almost every podcast. What's your favorite failure? So a failure that you can fondly remember and you feel like that's your favorite one that you learn from the most, maybe.
I would say that I think very early on in my coaching career, I wanted to try to get around college athletics. And I felt like if I could go work at Texas, this great program that had, Daniel Gibson and all these guys going to Elite Eights. And I worked these camps and made connections. And I said, could I please come volunteer? Okay, this is the assistant coach who handles that kind of thing. You should reach out to him. And he called back and he said, Will, I'm sorry. No, like there's a lot of guys who want to be with our program, and we've loved getting to know you over these past few months, but we don't have a role for you right now. And during that year, I opened my horizons. I thought about going and being a high school coach. I went back and I lived with my parents for a year and poured myself into substitute teaching and reading and trying to decide what my coaching journey was going to be and what was the next step of that. And I kept open the possibility that maybe it could be at Texas, and it ended up being that way. After a year's time, getting to know some more people, a door was open to me, and I was able to volunteer with them the following season. But that, had I just been gifted that opportunity at the time that I asked for it, I certainly wouldn't have appreciated it to the degree that I did a year later, and I would have missed out on the experiences I had being a head coach. I was head coach of a sub-varsity team at a high school level that gave me the chance to plan practices and interact with parents and have tough conversations with players. And it gave me a whole different mental model to bring into my time at Texas, where I was able to say, oh, well, this lesson would apply great to that. And I definitely would steal that if I was a high school coach again. And I definitely wouldn't do that if I was a high school coach. I don't think it applies as well. So just one of the many examples of how getting what you want when you want it is very rarely the best outcome.
Very good. Will, I appreciate your time. We've been chopping it up for a while, and you were very open and transparent, and lots of good stories, lots of very good substance here. So tell everybody how they can find you and contact you if they want to, and where is the best way to reach you. Email address, just social media.
Twitter is probably best. Coach WCW. And I really appreciate all the incredible stuff that you share on there, and that many others have. The way that people enrich our game now through that platform is something that I'm really grateful for. And I just convinced an Australian coach the other day to sign up for Twitter so that she could see and benefit from all these kinds of resources that are available to people. So I would certainly encourage any coaches that are holding out to jump on board and contribute in whatever small way they're willing to, and benefit from all the other contributions of others. And thank you, Dennis, for this. Is like, this podcast is one of the shining examples of how somebody can share the game in a way that is really meaningful. And so to all your loyal listeners, of which I'm one, I would like to say thanks to you too.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. It's much appreciated. And we're going strong. We got YouTube 1,900 subscribers. Keep subscribing, keep liking, keep sharing. And Will, I'll see you soon, hopefully somewhere live. And like you said, social media is a tool. It depends how you use it. It can mess with your brain, but it can also really benefit you in various ways. So keep using it.
I look forward, maybe as a result of your audience, connecting with a wider set of perhaps European coaches. I have such love and respect and appreciation for European basketball in particular, not only from Australian battles, but for the creativity and the unique styles that oftentimes get excluded from NBA basketball. And there's no basketball more fun watching to me than European basketball. So
absolutely
a chance to connect with a wider set of coaches.
They're coming at you. Trust me. All right, man. Talk to you soon. And thanks everybody for listening. Tune in. See you soon again. Much more coming.